Hello, this is Dr. Mike, and we are finishing up week 6, going into week 7 of our course. And I'm reading your work and learning about early American history as we wrap this up. Probably, I think this course will end us at the War of 1812, thereabouts. And I want to encourage you to drop me a note and maybe share with me something that stood out to you about what we've learned about the early American founding, and I think there's some things here that would be a help to you. This week, you are week 7. You're going to be doing another of those historical biography profile kind of deals, like I think we did at the beginning. And be sure that you pay careful attention. Choose someone from the list. Write carefully and writing your own words. That is a big deal. And make sure that you share what you learned. Copying it from AI or from some other source is not what we're looking for. I want to know what you learned, what you gained, what you ascertained from the writing. So let me encourage you to do that. So we're going to talk about the government under the colonial era, from the break with England, of course, up through the ratification of the Constitution today. And there's a lot of things here to cover, but I want to just try to give you a whet your appetite to help you with your reading as you move forward. There are several things that I find that most students do not take the time to digest. And one is that there were not that many differences between the colonials and the British in England. They were all British subjects. They all spoke with a British accent. They were all very much in line with the king as ruler. And I really do think that the revolution was a surprise in that they really weren't aiming to break with England until it got further down the road, but they did. It kind of was a runaway train, but they were just trying to get better representation that they felt they were being disparaged against, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Um, the thing that we do realize is that the British government made one mistake, and that was that they allowed the colonies too much self rule. And so it's hard to take that back when you give people freedom. It is largely difficult to redo that. For about 150 years, they had ruled themselves independently, and we had each state now, each colony had its own charter, assembly, and relationship directly with the crown. So it was a very intimate relationship for most of the colonies. Colonial assemblies like Virginia, the House of Burgesses, started in 1619, was the oldest, and it gave Americans a deeply ingrained habit of self governance long before independence ever happened. No colony thought of itself, as I said already, as American. A Virginian was a Virginian. A Massachusetts man was from Massachusetts. A South Carolina man was from South Carolina. The crown governed through royal governors, but real power increasingly resided in the colonial legislatures, which control the purse strings. And so whoever controls the purse strings actually controls the area. The Navigation Acts, the Stamp Act, the Townshend Act, and the Intolerable Acts radicalized colonists not because they rejected British identity, but because they believed their rights as Englishmen were being violated. There was no concept of being an American until well after the War of 1812. After the Revolution, they really did not know what to think of themselves. But they did. But after the second revolution, the War of 1812, they became Americans. The First Continental Congress in 1774 was not a revolutionary body, it was a petition body. And colonists still wanted to be British subjects and with representation in the Parliament in England. And they did have friends in the Parliament. There were British representatives, lords and nobles there, and commoners that kind of took up for the colonies. Excuse me, they appreciated what they were doing. The Second Continental Congress, 1775 to 78, actually became a de facto war government by necessity, not by design. It had no constitutional authority whatsoever. And then you have the interim years, the forgotten crisis, 1781 to 1787, and the Articles of Confederation were ratified March the 1st of 1781. Technically, this was the first American Constitution, but it was just barely a constitution. The Treaty of Paris, March 1781, was the end of the war, and they set up the Articles of Confederation to govern. The Treaty of Paris, signed in 1783, the British recognized independence, but the new nation had no coherent government to receive it. Now, these 6 years are arguably the most dangerous in American history. The revolution had been won, but the nation was dissolving from within. It was coming apart at the seams while they're waiting. Shays' Rebellion happened in 1786 and 87. The debt-ridden Massachusetts farmers, many of them veterans who had never been paid, took up arms against the state government. Congress could not respond. Washington wrote that it filled him with horror that this would happen. The nation had no power to enforce the Treaty of Paris. Britain refused to vacate frontier forts as required because Congress could not compel the states to honor their treaty obligations to British creditors. And so there was this impasse that was created. Spain closed the Mississippi River to American commerce in 1784, and Congress was virtually powerless. So we're in this power vacuum waiting for the new Constitution. No national currency was available. They could not levy taxes. They had no executives. They had no judiciary. And the articles created what they called a firm league of friendship, not a government. So they had very little power. So what happened basically was that each colony, which would become a state, set up their own government. They had their own legislature. They had their own executive. They made their own treaties. They made their own embargoes. All those things that they carried on their own trade individually. So we had 13 little countries trying to find their way. When we look at the Articles of Confederation, there were strengths and there were weaknesses. As far as strengths, that preserved the state sovereignty was one of them, which most Americans actually wanted. The Land Ordinance of 1785 and the Northwest Ordinance of 1787 were genuine achievements, established how new territories could be organized and admitted as states and banned slavery north of the Ohio River. So that was a marked move. Kept the new nation from fracturing immediately after the war, so it held things together and demonstrated that a republic could exist, proof of concept, however flawed. The weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation, the Congress could request, but it could not compel, taxes, troops, compliance with treaties, all depended on the goodwill of each state. No power to regulate commerce. States taxed each other's goods like foreign countries. New York charged tariffs on New Jersey firewood, for example. There was no executive branch, no one to enforce anything, no national judiciary. Disputes between states had no arbiter. Amendments requiring unanimous consent of all 13 states, which was effectively impossible. Every state had one vote, regardless of population. Large states resented this deeply and required 9 of 13 states to pass major legislation, which was a chronic inability to achieve a quorum. So they were very, very much divided. So in 1787, they decided that they would meet to either overhaul the Articles of Confederation or they decided actually to come up with a new constitution. So they were called merely to revise. The delegates almost immediately decided to scrap the thing entirely. It was held in Philadelphia from May to September 1787 in absolute secrecy. Windows were nailed shut in the summer heat, and Madison took the only detailed notes in the assembly. 55 delegates attended at various times. 39 signed the first document. Washington's presence was essential because he had the moral authority and held the convention together. Without him, it would have likely collapsed. Washington was the only commonly admired man in the group. Jefferson was in Paris. He was not there. And a couple of the other founding fathers. I think Benjamin Franklin was there most of the time. Some of the others were not. But there was a lot of great fault lines in this discussion. Number one, large states versus small states. They came with their own plans. The Virginia plan put forth by Madison wanted proportional representation in both houses. Large states would win. New Jersey planned equal representation for all states, where small states would win. And the Connecticut Compromise, the Great Compromise, was bicameral legislatures, that is, two bodies, proportional in the House, equal in the Senate, and that's what broke the deadlock. Because we had New Jersey's plan had one legislature, two executives, and Virginia plan had two legislatures, one objective, but they were all done proportionally. The Connecticut Compromise said, well, we'll have equal representation in the Senate, which corresponded to the English House of Lords, and we will have proportional representation in the Congress, and so that's what they went with. The other fracture was slavery. Southern states insisted on counting enslaved people for representation. 3/5 compromise was worked out so that every slave did not count as a whole person. He or she counted as 3/5 of a person. And so that's how they did the numbers of slaves. Slave trade protracted until 1808, was protected, a 20-year guarantee written into the Constitution. So they effectively kicked the can forward 20 years, said let them people deal with it. And they did. That's where the countdown for the Civil War started. Fugitive slave clause in the Constitution established enslaved persons must be returned, and it made the whole nation complicit in slavery. Whether you were in the North and against slavery or in the South and for slavery, you had to return a slave if you caught him or he was found with you. Federal power or state power was another fracture. How much sovereignty would states surrender? The Supreme Clause made federal law the supreme law of the land, a radical departure from the Articles. Every law would apply to every state. Commerce Clause gave Congress the power to over interstate commerce. The economic chaos of the Articles had made this essential. The executive branch, no one knew what a president should look like. They feared a monarchy, having just fought one. The Electoral College was a compromise, distrust of pure democracy, direct popular vote, combined with the distrust of the Congress selecting the executive. So that was a problem. The term language, 4 years, renewable, was debated extensively. Most delegates assumed Washington would be the first president. The office was in many ways designed around him with his understanding. In Washington's favor, he did two things that set the country on a good edge. Number one, he resigned his military appointment so there wouldn't be a military leader at the head of an army as president because he didn't think that bode well for freedom. So he retired, and he refused to take more than 2 terms as president because he said we needed to have a orderly transition of power. Several of the states kind of balked at this Constitution, and so they added, because it didn't have a Bill of Rights, and it was almost a fatal omission. Anti-Federalists like Patrick Henry, George Mason, Richard Henry Lee made this their central objection. The new government would devour individual liberties. Promises of a Bill of Rights was essential to securing ratification in key states like Virginia and New York. They barely ratified. Madison drafted the first 10 amendments in 1789. and they were ratified in 1791. Well, let's talk about the ratification just for a moment. A nation debating its own birth. 9 of 13 states were needed to ratify, but which 19? No executive branch, no one enforcing anything, and so it was important. The Federalist Papers that was written during this time, Hamilton, Madison, John Jay, writing as Publius, the greatest sustained argument for constitutional government ever written, 85 essays in New York newspapers. The Anti-Federalists were not wrong. They accurately predicted the dangers of consolidated federal power. And Delaware ratified first on December 1787. Rhode Island was last, 1790. And after the new government had been operating for a year before Rhode Island ratified. Virginia and New York ratification battles were brutal, but eventually ratified by a narrow margin. So Washington's election was unanimous. It was inevitable. It was unprecedented. The Electoral College met February 4th, 1789. Washington received all 69 electoral votes, the only president in history elected unanimously, and he did it twice, 1792 as well. He was not a candidate in any modern sense. He was drafted by consensus of a grateful nation. His greatest anxiety was not about winning, but about what the office meant. He understood that everything he did would set precedent for all future presidents. John Adams received 34 electoral votes for vice president. The original system gave the second place finisher the vice presidency, changed by the 12th of Washington's inaugural address, April 30, 1789, Federal Hill, New York, brief, humble, anxious. He deferred to his inferior endowments and expressed dread at the responsibility. He refused a salary. Congress insisted he take it. He refused a crown offered symbolically by some and refused a third term. Each refusal shaped the republic. So, as we've said, understanding who we were was quite a major undertaking. A Massachusetts man in 1790 still thought of himself as a Massachusetts man. Loyalty to state, region, church, locality preceded any kind of abstract loyalty to the United States. Constitution created a nation on paper, but it took events to create one in the heart. And the War of 1812 is that crucial catalyst. It was unpopular. It was badly managed. It was a war that nonetheless produced national mythology. We get our song Star Spangled Banner. Battle of New Orleans was major, with Andrew Jackson winning, even though he won after the peace treaty had been signed. And some people think he pushed his way through and fought the battle anyway, just for spite, to make himself worthy to be president. And Washington was burned in 1814, shocked the Americans into realizing they had a capital worth defending. Dolly Madison, the president's wife, escaped even as she could see the soldiers entering the city coming toward the White House. She managed to save the portrait of Washington and get in her buggy and flee and fled the British troops. She was planning a dinner that evening for about 40 people. The table was set, the food was cooked, and so before they burned the White House, the British soldiers sat down and ate her fabulous meal on beautiful china, and then burned the place to the ground on their way out the door. So the first generation of Americans born after the Revolution came of age just as the War of 1812 began, and they had no memory of being British subjects. They were Americans by birth and not by conversion. Noah Webster's dictionary was formed in 1828, a deliberate nation-building project, American spelling, American words, American identity on every page. And then another important thing was the Monroe Doctrine of 1823 declared American hemispheric identity to the world before most Americans felt it themselves. Alexis de Tocqueville, a Frenchman, arrived in 1831 and found a people who talked endlessly and passionately about being American. By then, the identity was being solidified, but it took 50 years to do that. So the Constitution was not the founding of a nation, it was the framework within which a nation had to be built. It was the blueprint. The founders knew this, Washington knew it, Madison knew it. The document they created was a bet on the future made by men who were far more terrified of failure than in history than remembering them as being. The identity that makes the Constitution meaningful, and this is important, is the sense of we the people as a real felt community was not presented in 1787. It arrived slowly, painfully through shared crisis and shared memory. And it was not fully operative until the generation that had never been anything but American came into its own after 1812. So after, as I said, the War of 1812 became the catalyst that brought about the idea of being an American. So think about that in terms of the Constitution. It was a framework that this country was going to be built around and used as a blueprint. And today we argue that quite differently. I have an article that I have just written on the Constitution about the different aspects of that as we go through history. I would love to put that into the announcement area and ask you to read that. I would like to hear some feedback from you. Comments are welcome. I encourage you to talk to me, to communicate. You learn so much more when you ask questions and talk about things. It helps you solidify in your own mind what you think about something. So let me encourage you to do that. Look for the article. I'll post it and I'll send you a note. Okay, have a great day. I hope you have a great week as we begin to wind things up. Keep your eye on the finish line. Don't be late. And if you need to get caught up, get to work. Okay. All right. Talk to you later. Thanks.